if you can believe it, we are in week 6, and after this, there's really only 2 more lectures left, which is unbelievably fast how it's turned out. But every year I always dedicate a class to our very hardworking nonprofit organizations to also share the work that they've done over the years, and continuing to do the work regardless of where things are in our world. So this is week 6. We'll be talking about our clean and just transportation network. I have representatives and my colleagues from Climate Solutions, Verde, Oregon Environmental Council, and Forth all here tonight to have a really good opportunity to share with you their work in the transportation space. Some are directly so, some are adjacent, but understanding that it's all very interrelated and very, very important. And we, let's see. So because we also recognize that this is, when we planned this, we didn't know it was going to end up being the whole week of election as we're waiting for results to come in. So rather than having a breakout session, which I had originally thought it would be, we really wanted to spend the second half of the class to talk about some stories, some lessons learned. So it'll be kind of a really nice dialogue conversation after the break to go into kind of a storytelling mode to share some of the work that our partners have done over the years. So again, welcome. I'm really happy to have essentially a very full class. And so I know that we, before we start, I did not have any homework assignments for this week, but I think the big homework assignment was actually getting all our ballots in and getting things in order. So I really wanted to have this evening tonight with everybody else to have a really good engaging conversation. So I'll do a quick introductions with everybody else, but I also want to acknowledge that the scavenger hunt game is still going on. So remember to work on your exploration of the city. Mulsry and I will be reviewing the rest or all of the scavenger hunt game the first week of December. So you have until essentially the last day of November. So I'm going to call it Thanksgiving weekend, November 28th to would be your drop dead deadline to put together the scavenger hunt game. And we'll be reviewing it, and we'll look at, kind of create a matrix in our evaluation, and also prizes that'll come out of that. So that's the update on the scavenger hunt. So be sure to turn it in by, or have it completed by the 28th of November. And also I want to remind you of your projects. So the last 2 weeks of class will be dedicated to project presentations. And over the last few weeks, I know you've noodled on so many amazing ideas, but it's really at this point to do your research, nail that down, and come up with some solutions. So I'm available the rest of this week and also next week if you have any other questions, and I'll do what I can to try to connect you and help you through. So that's my quick introduction. If you have any questions, feel free to put that in the chat or send me an email on the scavenger hunt or the projects. But tonight I want to get on with the program. So I'll do a quick introduction with everybody. First off, I will have my colleagues. So actually, Mulsry, can you take that off? Do you take the agenda screen off? I think this is a good opportunity so everyone can see each other, and I could recite it. But Paykar will be our first speaker from Climate Solutions. She's a transportation manager there. She and I and the rest of the team Vivian Satterfield, Director of Strategic Partnerships with Verde, a real great, amazing advocate who formerly was Opal and a big voice for transportation. Some of you may or may not know of Vivian, but she's been around. She's very well versed. She knows about this class. And next after Vivian is Sara Wright. Sara's with the Oregon Environmental Council, and she's also the Transportation Program Director there. And following Sara will be Rhett Lawrence, who's a policy manager with Fourth Mobility, so kind of an EV component to this. So one of the cool things we're going to talk about is also a project that I've worked with them over the last, oh my gosh, 6 months. At the beginning of coronavirus, everything just kind of happened. So it is, the project is called the Clean and Just Transportation Network. So you'll hear more about the work and how we put this all together. So I'll let V go first. Each of them will talk about their respective organizations. And after that, they'll all dive in and talk about the network and the work that we've been doing over the last few months. But V, would you like me to put the slideshow up now, or would you like to chat first?
I think we could chat first and then go into the slides later.
Okay, perfect.
Great. Thanks to you for the introduction. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Hope you all are doing well and taking care of yourselves. Most meetings that I've been going to the last 2 days have started off with just like, if it feels good, take a deep breath and like, just let it all out. So I'll invite you to do that if it feels comfortable or is accessible to you. So as you mentioned, my name is Paykar and I'm with Climate Solutions, and we're a small nonprofit here in the Pacific Northwest, and our mission is to transition the Pacific Northwest to 100% clean energy. And so we have an office here in Portland and in Seattle. At Climate Solutions, my position there is new for the organization. And so I joined in February, just before COVID. And I started there as the transportation policy manager for Oregon. And most recently, I've moved from Oakland, and I was working a lot in California, got into the field of transportation equity, and started working there. And my work evolved into more focus on environmental justice and environmental equity. And specifically, I was working a lot on programs that had to do with the California Cap and Trade program and understanding the different benefits that were going to low income and disadvantaged communities as defined by Cal EPA in California. So with that work, I was very excited to come to Oregon and to Portland and bring those kind of that understanding to my work kind of in this white-led environmental organization, and really focus on how can we really transform the transportation system while integrating these different intersections of transportation justice as well and environmental justice. So for me, I guess when thinking about it, I'm really interested in transportation justice as it relates to how can we clean up kind of the medium and heavy duty transportation sector. I grew up in downtown LA, and most of my family, as a result of that, suffer from respiratory illnesses. And so that's something that, in Portland as a city, like, we see, at least me coming to the city, I'm like, wow, it's so clean and beautiful. And then really looking at the particulate matter pollution that exists, and of course, particulate matter pollution that disproportionately exists in low income and communities of color, as something that exists like throughout the nation, right? And when we're thinking about like historic practices of redlining and the current institutional racism that exists in this country. And so a lot of my work is just thinking about that and how we can transform our transportation system holistically, and really looking at how we can bring benefits to low income and communities of color, and really changing that trajectory, and making sure that transportation is about access, accessing opportunities, accessing essential services, to really create that upward mobility and creating communities where we can all thrive. So I'll stop there and pass it off to Vivian. Thanks.
Thank you, V.
Thanks so much, V. I liked your invitation to take a deep breath. There's actually been a pair of kiddos on my block that every morning, about 10 minutes before 8, go running down the block screaming, and I've been very tempted to just join them, do a hot lap, just ah! I might do it tomorrow. We'll see we'll see how I feel when I wake up. It's really great to see all your faces, those who feel comfortable joining on video today. Hi, I'm Vivian Satterfield. I use she, her, or my name as my pronouns, and I work for Verde. I've been at Verde for the past 2 years in my current role as the Director of Strategic Partnerships. And prior to that, as Twee mentioned, I had the privilege of serving 6 years as the Deputy Director at Opal Environmental Justice Oregon, which really helped shape a lot of my transportation justice advocacy here in Portland. Much like V, I'm not from Portland, but unlike V, I am from another part of the United States, which experiences, environmental justice communities at this intersection of race and class and mobility and clean air and water. I'm originally from Chicago. I grew up a city kid, and lifelong transit rider, and I think that really helped shape some of my environmental justice lens, and has made me passionate about transportation justice and in an advocacy way. My earliest memory as a kiddo was waking up before it was even light out to accompany my mom, who worked as a hotel worker in downtown Chicago, and watch her, do her makeup and get ready for the day, and then, go and take a trek, typically through a Chicago winter, to go wait for a bus or for the L to take us downtown. And, that memory is so crystal clear for me because my family and I repeated that day after day. My mom's an immigrant. I grew up in a working class neighborhood. And so, childcare wasn't affordable. And so I'd go to work with my mom in a hotel until I was old enough to go to school. And so for me, the reason why I share that personal experience is because it's really shaped how I see environmental justice and how I see transportation justice. It's not just about getting from point A to point B, it's about access to opportunity. And that's the work that I was able to do at Opal Environmental Justice Oregon. And that's the work I continue, as I'm building out a transportation program for Verde. Verde is a nonprofit. We're located in the Cully neighborhood. You may know some of our work if you've ever visited Cully Park, which used to be a former brownfield and landfill, which is now an amazing community asset. And if you've got young people in your life, that playground is pretty cool. And there's a lot of green space there as well. And this intersection of, I always try to work in this sweet spot, and Verde really has a model that allows me to work at the intersection of racial justice, environmental justice, and economic justice. And so the fact that I've gotten to develop the energy, climate, and transportation program at Verde, which allows me to kind of work in that sweet spot, and to kind of build out our transportation program, has really been a privilege for the past 2 years, and has brought me into this partnership in which I get to work with V and Rhett and Sara and a bunch of other partners across the state of Oregon to imagine, what does a clean and just transportation network system look like for the state of Oregon. And so it's really great to think about our local work, and Verde typically uses our experiences in Cully, organizing with the Cully community, which is extremely diverse. It's one of the most diverse neighborhoods in the city of Portland. We'll see when the census count comes out, how shifts have happened, but I can tell you that our neighborhood, despite experiencing some gentrification and displacement, has largely remained very diverse, very working class. And I just lost my train of thought. My dog went through, through the room. Anyways, so yeah, those are some of the aspects that I'm looking forward to sharing more with you all about. And I've got a whole bunch of stories. We'll see what I want to share with you as the evening goes on. Thanks.
Thank you, Vivian. Sara, would you like to go next?
I would love to go next. Thank you. It is a pleasure hearing from everybody about the backstory because we don't always have time to kind of talk about these things. So it's really nice. With that said, I'm going to keep this pretty brief. So I came to OAC about a year ago, or a year and a half ago, I guess now, in this weird time blob that we live in now. And I came in as OAC's first full-time transportation policy person in a while. We've been involved in transportation policy for a long time, but now we're really kind of growing the program and figuring out what we want to do. And that was pretty exciting for me because my background is really in big pictures, in kind of putting things together and figuring out what happens at the intersection of different disciplines. Thinking about the world from a pretty generalist and holistic perspective. My background is actually in public health and also in urban planning. So I am an overeducated generalist is functionally what I am. So I was pretty excited about the opportunity to come into OAC. OAC is not a council. It's the Oregon Environmental Council. So we get calls all the time from people complaining to us about our failures to fix the environment because they think we're a governmental agency. So we're not a council. We are not a government agency. We are a nonprofit that was founded in 1968 at a time when I think Oregon Environmental Council sounded like a really good, solid, reputable name for a nonprofit. So we continue with that name. We're one of the older nonprofits working in the environmental space in Oregon, for better and for worse. And I'm going to read you our tagline that I always forget. So I'm going to read it to you. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan, membership-based statewide policy advocacy group working at the intersection of human health and the environment. So we're not looking at wildlife or the wilderness. We are really addressing the environment in the way that it affects human lives. So the organization's strategic goals really focus around clean and plentiful water, toxic-free environments, and climate protection. The transportation work lives mostly in the climate protection space, but it of course affects both of the other two areas of work. We also have kind of an underlying rural partnership program and working to extend and build relationships across the state because we are a statewide organization. So that can take some extra work to get out of the Portland metro bubble and really be talking to communities outside of that area. I think a couple of other things I want to just mention about Oregon Environmental Council. We have a full-time legislative director, which means functionally lobbyist. So we have a presence in Salem that there are not a lot of people working in Salem on environmental issues full-time. So having that lobbyist capacity really makes a difference. In a state like Oregon, the legislature works in a very small town kind of way. It's all about personal relationships, and going trout fishing with your buddies in the legislature is kind of how you make friends and influence people. So that's just a really important part of our work. And yeah, I think, so in the work that I've been doing since I got hired was mostly trying to figure out what is going on and who's doing what. I used to work actually at the City of Portland at the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. So that's my immediate background before this job. So I came in with some knowledge of city politics and policy, but less so of state policy. So as I've been kind of coming up to speed as much as I can, I've been learning a lot over the last year about the way that all of the agencies work and don't work, and learning a lot particularly about ODOT, which has been character building. So that has been an experience for me, and I'm starting to feel like I'm starting to slightly get a handle on some of the things, but not all the things. So for me, it's been a lot of collecting information and putting stuff together. And one of the things I'm really struck by in Oregon is how few people are paying attention to most of the things that are going on, because it is a small state with very little capacity, and how much space there is for advocates to really step in and make a ruckus where nobody else is paying attention. There's a lot of space there to have a lot of influence if you start paying attention to something that nobody else is. So for me, that's been one of the take-home messages that was really surprising to me that I hadn't really grasped. So my work primarily, I thought this would be really quick, but now I'm just talking and talking. My work is really focused on reducing vehicle miles driven and then electrifying the remaining VMT. So those are kind of the two prongs of my work. And, I work on both of those. I think they go together kind of essentially. And the organization also works on kind of cleaning up electricity, sort of to kind of complete that loop. And that's not an area that I work in a lot, but my work touches on that side of things. So that's all I'm going to say, I think. And thank you for having me. This is really fun.
Thank you, Sara. I've worked with you over the last few months and have no idea what your background is. This is amazing. It takes a class like this for me to get more acquainted with my colleagues. Thank you. Rhett, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thanks, Twee. Yeah, so hey, everybody. I'm Rhett Lawrence. I'm the Pacific Northwest Policy Manager at Fourth. Before I'd started here back in January of this year. Before that, for 7 years, I was the Conservation Director over the Oregon chapter of the Sierra Club. I see my friend Mariah. I got to work with her over there. And actually in that role, spent a lot of time down in the Capitol as the chapter's lobbyist too. Before that, I worked for a salmon advocacy organization trying to take out those dams up on the lower Snake River up in eastern Washington. Worked for OSPERG for a number of years, practiced law for a little bit, but been out here in Oregon doing environmental advocacy for about 20 years now, and excited to be part of this class. So thanks for having us here tonight, Twee. Yeah, so I started at Fourth back in January, as I said. Fourth is a nonprofit trade organization working to promote electrified transportation across the board. We started out as Drive Oregon back in 2011, which really was just an organization sort of devoted to building out the sort of nascent EV industry, EV network in the state. And just a couple hundred EVs in the state back in 2011, up to more than 30,000 now. Excuse me. And Fourth has expanded its work out from beyond just electric vehicles, electric passenger vehicles that I think most people think of as the EV advocacy organization. And as we'll talk about in our presentation about the network, sort of working across the spectrum of electrified transportation. So, medium and heavy duty, vehicles, trucks and buses and, scooters and electric bikes, sort of working to promote that, not just in Oregon, but in Washington. We have a little bit of a national presence now. So really trying to expand out the work that we're doing to a more regional and national scale. So in addition to the sort of policy stuff that, I primarily have been doing over the years, working down in the Capitol, and was the major piece of what I did when I started back in January, worked in the short session legislature this past year. I mean, Fourth still does sort of work to be the connective tissue of the electrified mobility industry in the state. We've got 185 members in the state, from utilities to nonprofit organizations like V's and Sara's and Vivian's organizations are all Fourth members. Auto manufacturers, EV charging providers are all part of members of Fourth. Put on a big roadmap, the electric roadmap conference in the summer of every year down at the Oregon Convention Center, and just sort of continuing to work to build out that network of electric infrastructure in the state, and trying to continue to build out the adoption of electric vehicles in the state. As I said, we're up to more than 30,000 now, but when you got 3 million vehicles on the road, if we're really going to get a handle on the climate crisis, and recognizing too that this is all part of a spectrum. I mean, we need to get people out of cars to the extent we can and into transit and biking and walking. But a lot of people still own cars, and a lot of people are going to own cars for a long time. And so to the extent we can get them all electrified and not contributing to the climate crisis, that's a big part of our mission. So still working to sort of build out that EV market in the state. And then, working, it's, been a real privilege to work with these folks as in the Clean and Just Transportation Network to try to build out that electric mobility in a more equitable way. I mean, I think EVs and electrified transportation are seen as, strictly the province of the, latte sipping Tesla drivers in Portland. And I think if we're going to solve the climate crisis, we really need to get past that. We really need to be electrifying all of the modes of transportation, if we can't get people out of cars, completely. And so working within this network to try to do that as equitably as we can, and to design the policies that work best for each individual neighborhood. And so rather than us just coming out and saying, don't you want some EVs? Don't you want some, EV infrastructure out in your neighborhoods? That doesn't work for every neighborhood. And so, sort of crafting policies in conjunction with neighborhoods and neighborhood-based organizations to make sure that we are designing the programs that work best for them. And so that is what, Fourth is trying to become, and so grateful to have the partnership of this network that you're going to hear more about shortly, to move that work along and make sure that we're doing it in the right ways as we do it. So I think I'll stop there.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Rhett. Thank you, all of you, for the introduction. Does anybody have any questions for each of the speakers before we go into a slide deck about the clean and just transportation? So I want to kind of have give you the floor to ask any specific questions for the organizations, since we have them before we talk about the work that they've been launched to do.
I see a chat question for V.
Oh. Is
Yeah,
that
so
from...
the question is from Paul. How do you balance transportation and climate justice for EV fleet battery manufacturing with externalizing that pollution to the developing world? I think that's a really good question, and something that we in the US haven't really quite figured out, because we're so used to dumping our problems in other parts of the world. I mean, even just thinking about like the VW settlement, like where did all those cars go that they recollected? They shipped them to the third world, right? And so this is a problem that we, as advocates, definitely, when we're thinking about like holistic solutions, definitely need to be considering as part of like, how are we pushing automakers and others to really incorporate these like social justice problems, and really think about how to transition in the most equitable way. So I would say that, to answer your question shortly, we haven't solved this problem, and it's something that we need to be working on. But yeah, I think definitely just through like advocate pressure, as far as like how can we pressure, for example, Tesla to think about accepting unions for their workers, or other kinds of issues like battery when batteries like are no longer useful, where are we putting them, and then yeah, all those other types of problems. So I don't know if Rhett might have some other thoughts as well. But
yeah, no, and that's a great summary, V. I mean, I think I would say, especially to the battery issue. I mean, we are, of course, EVs have the oldest EVs that are still in use are sort of, some of them will be reaching the end of their useful life fairly soon, and so we are going to start having to confront that sort of the battery disposal issue. And I don't, I know that some of the manufacturers, I think Nissan is starting to design a pretty good battery reclaim policy for its batteries. That the older model Leafs are the ones that are going to be coming off the road soon. And but I don't think there is a perfect answer, and I don't know that they have decided what they're going to do with those batteries. And I think we, as V said, we all need to make sure that we're not contributing to just sort of shipping them off to to South Asia or somewhere, or Africa, as we've done with so much of other refuse from our society. And so I will say that one thing I have heard is that current sort of lead car batteries are recycled something like 90% of the time. And so, I think we can assume and hope that, with these $1,000 EV batteries, that somebody's going to find a way to make good financial use of that material. If they can do it for a $60 car battery, I think they can do it for a $1,000 EV battery. And so, but the onus is on us as an industry and as industry representatives to make sure that is where that we are solving those problems and not turning it into someone else's problem.
I just want to jump in on that too. I think that V really points to the importance of thinking about the big picture of everything that we're doing and not getting sort of tunnel focused on one solution. And I think that that's something we work all the time to try to do, to be thinking holistically about what problem are we trying to solve and what consequences are we causing along the way. But I do want to underline that the rare earths and other resources that are involved in the production of EVs are also really involved in the production of a lot of other things, including non-EVs. And the Koch brothers have pushed a particularly effective messaging around this sort of EVs are worse for the environment than regular cars. So that messaging has been promoted heavily by the fossil fuels industry. So not to say that it isn't a really important issue that we shouldn't be grappling with all the time, but just a note of caution in considering those messages. Sometimes they are not coming from people who actually care about the answers, regrettably.
Vivian, do you have anything to add to that, or we can also go to the next question? Okay, the next question comes from Phil, and I think it's a really good one. So I'll let the four of you tag team to see which ones want to take this one first. But it's on the chat. It's in the chat room. It says, "Is Oregon a good proxy for the U.S. and thinking about how to build on your successes, or is the policy environment here conducive to getting that demonstrable success in the first place?"
I can go ahead and take the first shot at answering Phil's astute question for us here. It's interesting because I think Oregon and the Portland metro region has done a very good job of exporting this brand and this idea that the way that we make policy here is innovative, it's fresh, it's something that suits Oregonians. And so, that has made it difficult to actually create more progressive policy and to reshape that narrative towards justice. A lot of times, especially in the transportation field, I think that I'm sitting with having just worked on a campaign that failed at the regional ballot. And so, can we continue to say that we're really leading on transportation? I think that we've been resting on our laurels for quite a long time in the transportation sector. And so I see Sarah nodding emphatically. And so I think that Oregon has some really good stories to share about how we've created a ripe environment, which includes the education and the sort of civic engagement, including this class. Y'all are here talking about transportation because there's an interest, and I think that is inherently something that Oregon has tried really, really hard over the decades to build to build some, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but to build that environment. And yet it impedes us from talking about the real issues, to tackle the root causes of injustice, not just, on transportation, on so many issues which affect people's lives. So it's both.
Yeah, I would just agree with Vivian. And I, as my colleagues know, I am inclined toward pessimism as a general temperamental rule. So it's hard for me right now where I am to look at Oregon and say that we've had successes. With that said, we've had lots of, particularly around land use and transportation planning, a lot of past work that has really played out. And I want to say a lot of really great bureaucrats in Oregon, honestly, who are doing really great work inside agencies. And for all I'm mean about ODOT, there are a lot of great people working really hard in those places. And I say that as a former bureaucrat in Oregon. I think we have a culture of wanting to do the right thing, but I also think we're at a moment right now where making the change we need to make is huge, and it goes well beyond the kinds of liberal platitudes that we're kind of comfortable with in a lot of spaces in Oregon. And so I think we're facing a challenge of making some really big changes that are not comfortable for people. And so it's just a hard hill to get over. With that said, I think there are a lot of parallels between Oregon and sort of the national picture. Of course, we have sort of a rural urban perceived divide, I guess I would say, rather than an actual divide, and a lot of the same tensions that play out. We have encountered the same polarization in politics that make it difficult to compromise or really to get anything done, we find now. So I think there's some translatable stuff, of course, as there is in any advocacy space, but also some that just doesn't translate. But and again, I just want to underline how small town Oregon politics is. And so it is very different than operating at the federal level.
And I guess I would pick up on that urban-rural divide thing, but I do think, you know, especially coming from all those years at the Sierra Club, where, you know, every single thing I went down to the Capitol about, you know, was turned into a partisan issue. And, you know, every single Republican legislator these days, I mean, sadly, you know, there's no such thing as an environmentally inclined Republican in the Oregon legislature anymore. You know, anytime the Sierra Club walks into their office, it's a confrontational meeting. You know, I have been sort of pleasantly surprised to see how you know, nonpartisan an issue transportation can be. I mean, yeah, you know, you know, Republicans want EVs and EV infrastructure in their districts too. They want electric buses. They don't, you know, do they want to, you know, do the businesses there want to pay for it? Well, no, you know, so we got to solve that problem. But I do think, you know, Oregon at least can provide some examples for how we, you know, can do these things together, because we all realize we've got a climate crisis we need to solve, and transportation, you know, issues that affect all of us. And so I am hopeful at least that there is a path forward to get a lot of this work done in Oregon and show others how you can do it too.
Yeah, and I guess I can quickly add, if, you know, adding to what has been said already and thinking about like the glass is half full, it's like any success that we can get through in Oregon, we can definitely showcase them as replicable in other states with that kind of partisan divide. And so I think that that's important, like to think about. And yeah, I guess just like on Sarah's note, like earlier when we were talking about batteries and like which sides are like pushing, you know, what agendas and like what actually, yeah, like what's their subliminal agenda actually. So I think that that's like important to think about. And when we're talking about like in the environmental space, right, like, you know, 30 years ago, climate change wasn't a partisan issue, you know, and so it's like thinking about like business interests involved in all of these things, and like to continue just like reaping off the benefits of, you know, all of us. I think that that's important to think about, and hopefully we can try to like mend that when we're thinking about like, you know, coming up with like bipartisan solutions. But honestly, now looking at the glasses half empty side, you know, I don't know like where to start either, when, you know, maybe some Republican lawmakers are like, you know, we're not even going to talk about this policy issue because you mentioned climate change. So like I don't know like where to start there. So I guess there's both sides of the things, both sides of the coin, but just some thoughts.
Does anybody have any other questions or comments before we start the presentation on the Clean and Just Transportation Network. We do have some time, but we can also start that presentation. It'll give us a good chance to go over what we've been working on over the last 6 months, 8 months almost. Yeah. Malsri, could you bring up this PowerPoint slide, please? Yes. Thank you. Those are really, really good questions, and they're great answers. And it's good to have it all from the four perspective. I think it's awesome. So we're going to bring this up, and I'll let you go from there. Any one of you. V, you might start first, but
No, it's
I'll let
me.
you. I'll let you take the stage.
Okay, so the Clean and Just Transportation Network is sort of the baby, the offspring of our four organizations: Climate Solutions, Fourth, Oregon Environmental Council, and Verde. So we come together really around transportation decarbonization. And we each have a different focus and approach, and our shared work really benefits from the strengths of each organizations. And I would also argue that it also benefits from the tension between some of our disagreements, the things that we don't align on. And it's been, just my editorial comment, it's been a delight to work with these other organizations and with these other folks. So I feel like it really enriches the work that I do, for sure. So why bother? Why should we do this work? And, I think a lot of times when we talk about transportation, we talk about making minor changes to what already exists, on the assumption that what already exists is as it should be and as it shall always be, without thinking about the basic functionality of our system. Is it doing what we need it to do? And the answer is no. The current transportation system is not just safe, efficient, or sustainable. And it touches everybody's lives and everything. And this is one of the most wonderful and really challenging things about transportation policy, because everybody has a transportation experience, a personal transportation experience that they bring to the table. And so it affects not only environmental outcomes, but also people's safety and their health and access to opportunity in all communities. And I think the salient point that I really underline as much as possible is that the burdens of the system, the air toxics, the risk of injury, the cost of all the space that we dedicate to storing and moving cars, they all fall most heavily on the same people who benefit the least from the advantages the system provides overall. So I think we're all coming from the perspective that a lot needs to change in our transportation system. And we have to address climate. Transportation is the single largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in Oregon. And that, unlike the other sources of emissions, that is rising. That trend is going up, not down. And we also believe, of course, that you have to, so we need to address the carbon emissions, decarbonize transportation. But along the way, we have to make sure that the transition, as we make the system cleaner and safer and more efficient and more sustainable, and better serving the needs of everybody, we need to make sure that it benefits people along the way who have not been benefiting from the system in the past. So that's essential to the work that we're doing. And then this last point, proactive versus reactive posturing, this really comes from the fact that we came together because we realized that our organizations and others around the state that are interested in transportation policy, we will only come together when there has been something like a danger, when something is happening that looks like a problem, or a potential problem with potential opportunities, like a big transportation bill. So we've been reactive. We're kind of responding to stuff that's happening. And we really felt like there was a need to come together in a proactive way to decide what we want and actually try to get that, and set that up instead of always fighting against what we don't want. Next slide, please. So it's just a sort of snapshot of the folks. So with those premises from the beginning, we reached out to a bunch of other organizations who've worked on transportation policy with us in the past, or who we thought might be interested, to invite them to participate in a network it took us a long time to figure out what it is exactly, but we've really come around to it just being a network. And these are some of the groups, most of the groups who have participated to some degree or another in our group. And with that said, I will pass it off to V for the next slide.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so Sarah just shared a list of all of our network members who in their capacity work directly on transportation issues and or transportation adjacent issues. So that includes issues such as housing policy, so thinking about like how changes in transportation affect displacement and gentrification. Also includes racial, environmental, and other social justice organizations who are thinking about like who has been left out of or purposefully excluded from the benefits of our transportation system. And also including partners outside of the urban core, so who bring perspectives of the needs of non-urban folks when it comes to transportation solutions, and other groups representing a variety of interests. So the good news is that having folks with diverse representation in your group allows for the identification of what's needed of our system as a whole. And so that allows us to seek holistic solutions to our transportation system. And so to that end, our network, we kind of brainstormed and synthesized and developed like the following priorities that our network aims to achieve. And so that includes safe, affordable, and convenient mobility options, access to jobs, education, essential services, and community resources, climate change mitigation, racial equity, and clean air. So next slide, please. All right, so transportation is the biggest source of climate pollution, as Sarah was talking about earlier, and it exacerbates issues such as poor public health, toxic air quality, and inequitable access to economic opportunities. And as we know, due to historic racist public policies, these problems are still disproportionately present in low-income communities and communities of color. And because of these existing inequities, in order to achieve, transportation to achieve a transportation system that works for all, we have to focus on first creating an equal playing field where transportation solutions are led with a racial and social equity lens. So that's why in order to achieve our collective vision of a clean and just transportation system, we're actively working and checking in with our network partners to prioritize evolving community needs and input, and lead with the following transportation equity goals throughout our work. So we think a lot about the reduction of air and climate pollution through transportation electrification. So that has a focus of benefiting low income and communities of color. We're thinking about cleaner fuels and also vehicle miles travel reduction. The second one is a just transportation system, so incorporating transportation equity priorities. So a system that is more affordable, that's more accessible, more efficient, and more safe. And then the third one is enhanced economic opportunities through transportation policies and programs that provide targeted benefits for low income and communities of color. So this is especially comes up in the transportation electrification work that we do a lot. And so thinking about where are those connections with labor that we can make to really ensure that when, for example, transportation electrification infrastructure is being placed in certain communities, that those community members are able to benefit from the jobs created, and also like are there opportunities to create workforce development pipelines that ensure that we have the appropriate amount of expertise able to transition us into this new system. And also I would add into this third piece as well, thinking about like enhancing economic opportunities is really thinking about, as I mentioned earlier, just thinking about like the holistic sense of transportation. And when we expand transportation options, we also have a chance, or I guess not a chance is probably a bad word, but we also have a negative consequence of creating green gentrification. So thinking about how are we how are we incorporating, you know, housing policies or protections that really that are making sure that whatever is being done to a community is because this is a community-led effort. This is something that will benefit the community, and this is something that the community has advocated for and is excited to use. And then on top of that, then also thinking about like renter protections and other housing policy protections so that we're not creating displacement and gentrification with these types of projects. Next slide. And so our work, I'm just going to quickly talk about our two different work groups, and then I'll pass it off to Rhett and Vivian. And so we have these two main areas of work. So we have this network that Sara mentioned, and those were like all the lists of the different groups that were are involved in the network to some capacity. And so then we have these two working groups where we have more of like the coalition type of work. So coming together, you know, figuring out what agencies are doing what, how we can be more involved and provide kind of that stakeholder engagement and input, what comment letters we need to write, what action we need to do at the legislative level, at the local level, et cetera. And so those two work groups are the Equitable Transportation Electrification Work Group and the Sustainable Transportation Funding Work Group. So I'll pass it off to Rhett now. Thanks.
Thanks. Next slide, please. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so as V mentioned, so V and I co-chair the Transportation Electrification Work Group. We're meeting once a month with various members of the network. And recently have been excited to have, we've sort of expanded out the number of groups that have been participating in this in the Clean Just Transportation Network by awarding some mini grants to some other organizations that are serving mostly, you know, sort of underserved communities. And so really been excited to get more of those folks out into this work and involved in our work group. So yeah, so meeting once a month, and again, sort of recognizing, as I mentioned in my discussion earlier, that you know, if we're going to meet our climate goals, if we're going to get people out of, you know, gas guzzling clunker cars, we really need to, you know, electrify the entire transportation system, but also recognizing that it's, you know, really is only a piece of a puzzle. You also need to be looking at expanding transit and getting, you know, more bicycle and pedestrian access, all of that. And so really a sort of overarching, you know, transportation need needs to be met, but transportation electrification needs to be a part of that. And so, again, you know, as I mentioned too, that you know, Fourth was founded to promote electric vehicles, but and we do that, but also, you know, need to recognize that this really is much more about than getting more people into electric passenger vehicles. And so, you know, and as V mentioned, you know, want to keep an equity lens on everything we do, make sure that all of the work that is happening through our work group is meeting the needs of, and, you know, considering the input of all the impacted communities. And so just, you know, a couple of quick examples of some of the work that our work group has been focusing on here this year. Many of you may know that Governor Brown issued this great climate executive order back in March of this year. And there were, you know, many transportation electrification components to that bill, directing, you know, a dozen different agencies to take various initiatives. And so we're working with the work group to sort of monitor the pieces of that executive order that are being implemented through the PUC, through Department of Environmental Quality, through the Department of Transportation. And so that's provided a real focus. You know, some of those components are sort of coming up on comment periods soon. And so getting people engaged in that work. And then, you know, again, sort of working to expand out the notion of transportation electrification beyond passenger cars to those buses, to the, you know, to the electrified 18-wheelers that are going to be coming soon, to the, you know, sort of delivery vans that, you know, that we can turn into electrified versions of those. And so working to expand out that medium heavy duty sector, that's what that acronym is. And then also working with the work group to come up with some proposals that may be relevant in the 2021 legislative session, working on a plan to expand out EV ready building code. So making when you're constructing new buildings that you have to create some percentage of each of your parking spaces to be ready for the coming EV revolution. We'll be working with the governor on an omnibus transportation bill to do a bunch of good work, including expanding out the low income EV rebate. And so lots of opportunities that we're going to be exploring in the work group, and excited to get that moving. And obviously, if any of you as part of this class want to get involved in our work, we would welcome you to it. And I will hand it off to Vivian to talk about the funding work group. There we go.
All right. Thanks, Rhett. So the second work group that we have within our network is the Transportation Funding Work Group. I get to lead this work alongside Sara at OEC. And, we are meeting pretty aggressively. We're meeting about 2 times a month. And so, network members not only attend the quarterly network meetings, but also can participate in one or both of the work groups. So as you can tell, our folks are actually really dedicated and super fired up to be in these discussions. The framing that we're using in our transportation funding work group is what you see on the second bullet point here. Because we're really rooting it in an equity framework. So think again to how we are defining equity within our network overall, and then how are we pulling that thread through into talking about transportation funding. The framing that we're using here is that the existing transportation system is not working for all. It is time to think differently about transportation investments and take a new approach that is more efficient, centers health and equity as non-negotiable outcomes, and is more sustainable for future generations. So thinking back to some of the, one of the first questions that we answered, that was posed to us in kind of this, question after introductions was, what can we export to other places? What can we share about lessons learned here in Oregon? Well, some of it is, of course, the overall dynamics of our legislature, and some of it is just Oregon's like super funky, messed up, inequitable taxing system. And so this really gets to, how we raise transportation funding overall. How does ODOT get their budget? How do local governments then get a share of that budget in order to do the things that we all want to see, which is to invest in transportation options, to, ensure that transit is affordable and frequent, and to, fix some potholes because, we all use our streets. So who pays for that? How is it paid for? That the transportation funding work group is really drilling down into the overall funding landscape here. And so and this is kind of like fresh from the work group thinking that I'm sharing with y'all. We want to address that ways that we are currently spending money, and then what our potential is to generate new revenue, which also has some really strong accountability, because that's clearly something that we all know is that like we need to understand better how our agencies and how our local governments are spending, and transit agencies are spending our transportation dollars on the outcomes that we want to see, which address mobility, climate, health, all of that. So, we're working to develop this shared frame on transportation funding, and we are going to be launching a messaging campaign in order to do broader education across the entire state. That includes not just community members, but also decision makers at every level of government, including, the bureaucrats who are, figuring out what projects should be prioritized, what pot of money are they going to be pulling. We're applying for federal dollars. What projects should we be sending up for application to that? So I think a lot about that when I think about like the Southwest Corridor Light Rail, for example. That was to help meet a federal match dollars that were on the table. Same thing with the division, bus rapid transit, which you all folks may be familiar with that project, which underwent planning a number of years ago. Those were all developed and like uplifted to help meet these federal match dollars. And so, how do we build an accountability to say like at the local level, hey, this project over that one, that's kind of what we want to address. So, currently what we're thinking about doing this messaging campaign around in order to educate folks around is the road user fee. It has the fun acronym of saying the rough tough. Sounds like it should be like a dog toy company. There's also, we want to be able to do defensive work around highway projects, because highway expansion is still a line of thinking. It's like the tough thing when you're in the transportation sector of explaining to other people, because it kind of goes against what you would inherently think, which is that if you expand roadways, it actually creates more traffic. Like, it's just very counterintuitive, and it's a tough thing to explain to someone because it's actually not intuitive. So we need to do defense work around highway projects. That's where so much of our statewide funding still goes to disproportionately. We also want to do some education and messaging around congestion pricing and tolling. Congestion pricing has undergone a number of different branding ways of talking about it, but we're using congestion pricing right now to talk about what it is, tolling. And then ultimately to address the thing that I'm really passionate about, which is the Highway Trust Fund. The Highway Trust Fund currently has an estimated $3.4 billion in assets. And it actually faces an unsustainable financial future. So the fund is going to be insolvent. ODOT is projecting in about 4 years. So that creates some urgency and fits within our time frame of thinking about a messaging campaign, in order for us to think about, like, hey, this existing source of revenue that we have at the state is going to go away for a whole host of reasons, more fuel efficient vehicles, higher adoption of electric vehicles. And so, what do we need to do as a state to find new sources of revenue? So really excited to have partners such as the Oregon Center for Public Policy in this sphere, who has a lot of experience about how to break down these kind of complex, inaccessible things, like thinking about statewide taxes into a way that we can understand it. And then how can we work alongside our network members who have specific lived experiences within their communities to make that connection between, like, something super wonky, gas taxes, tolling, to like a real life scenario, right? Like, what is happening with a community in Bend? What is happening in a community that's along the coast, right? Like, how do we actually create a narrative and say that these are the components that we need to address in order to solve the problems that we have in our unique geographic areas. Sara, did you want to add anything while we're talking about our work group before we go to open it up for questions?
Nope. I think you covered it all. Thank you.
Awesome. So yeah, our presentations have been like at the network level, been super fun. We've had, again, Oregon Center for Public Policy come. We've had the Greenlining Institute come as well to talk about transportation equity. So the network spaces, which again are quarterly, is a great opportunity for us to actually all become educated on some topic related to transportation justice, whether it's taxing or whether it's another topic. And then work group updates happen, and then we kind of break into our work groups and are able to do the work alongside that. So there's actually a lot going on as I'm sharing that. And TWE's amazing work with us helped us create the opportunity for us to actually become funders and go through a funding process in which we were able to do mini grants to expand the participation, geographic, and racial diversity of our participants. So we're super excited by the preliminary success of that in growing our network. So much of my professional work in this space has been coalition building, and this has actually been a really innovative way to continue doing coalition/network building around this. And so I think we were just going to go to questions, and I see there's already some in the chat. So I don't know, Twee, if you'd like to facilitate those, or
I just want to put a shout out, like, you guys, it was so fun working with you. Especially during like the pandemic, and a really cool opportunity to be working in this space, and also like to give away money to corporations in order for them to be a part of this. So it was top of my work and something I really, really enjoyed working on. So thanks for making it happen and continuing to make it happen. So I love it. It's like full circle, bringing you guys back just to let me know how the success of the project is going. But yeah, we could definitely go to questions right now. I think there's already 3 that are that's been posed. So the first one was from Lejeune, and she had asked, what will happen with gasoline tax revenues declining? I'll let you.
want to go
Any
for
of-
it, Sarah?
I do, but I actually want to answer all three of them, so I need to be restrained, clearly.
No, go for it.
No, we have time.
I'll start in with the gasoline tax revenues. So gas tax revenues are declining, yes, but really slowly. ODOT likes to sell a narrative that their budget is in the hole because of those pesky EV drivers not paying their fair share. Like that's literally what they say, except for the pesky part. But the fact is the gas tax revenues, because the gas tax hasn't been raised in, I don't know, forever, something like that. And it's never been raised and indexed to actually go up to the amount that would actually support the investments that need to be done. That is a bigger problem at the moment. However, looking into the future, we know that if we achieve our goal of decarbonizing transportation, there will be no gas tax revenue, ideally. So we know that we need to shift to a revenue stream that works in the future. And the road user fee, the rough tough, the dog toy that Vivian was talking about is that transition. There's a whole can of worms there that I would love to unpack and take out, but I'm not sure that we have time to talk about that right now. Vivian, you want to jump in on gas tax?
Yeah, this is a huge conundrum. A lot of local jurisdictions are also grappling with how they're going to keep up some of their maintenance projects, and not all like road building is inherently bad, right? Like we want to see bike paths and we want to see trails and we need to maintain the infrastructure that we have. I just want to be really, really clear around that. But like highway expansion, auxiliary lanes, like that's bad. And so, I think that a lot of folks are kind of freaking out a little bit about what they are going to do. And I just want to also highlight that the City of Portland gas tax was something that was a local initiative, applies to the City of Portland in order to complete a very clear project list, which prioritize infrastructure gaps and maintenance needs in areas that have been long neglected and or like actively disinvested in for a long time. So I think that there are some signals and some precedent for local jurisdictions really trying to figure out how they could take advantage of the existing gas tax in a way, like maximize it in a way for good, but also trying to figure out what comes next.
Can I jump on the e-bike question? All right.
Do you want to say that what the question was?
So the question is, where'd it go? So many questions piling up. There are currently subsidies, rebates for electric cars. Are there any such programs coming for e-bikes? I would love for there to be. And there's a couple of lists I'd love to get you onto, Josh, if you're interested in advocating for that. There's a lot of interest in e-bike rebates. There are some models, there are other countries that actually give you cash to buy an e-bike. We have some around the country. There are a couple of utilities actually that offer rebates for e-bikes, but they're like $200, which isn't really enough of a rebate if you're low income for an e-bike. It's a really interesting area that we would like to really work on. That said, there are some folks who are like, just take away the rebates from the electric cars. We don't need them. Let's get rebates for e-bikes instead. And that's not something that OAC is particularly interested in supporting, because EVs are necessary and can be really useful for low-income drivers. We would like to see additional rebates added on for e-bikes, because e-bikes can be transformative for people in terms of reducing car trips, replacing car trips, but also in terms of increasing mobility for people who currently have limited mobility and could benefit from getting access to more of their worlds through e-bikes. So we see e-bikes as a huge opportunity. And we're sort of continuing to figure out where are the ways that we can leverage existing funding sources, like the Clean Fuels program, for example, to try to find money for those rebates, and also seeing if there are ways that we can work with employers to get them to provide rebates, because it helps them when their employees are getting around by e-bike. So there's kind of small picture things that we're working on, but in terms of getting like a state rebate for e-bikes, this right now is not the budgetary environment that we can get that to happen, but working up to it. So that the long answer, the short version of that is no, there's no program coming. And if we want one, we have to make it. So join us, Josh.
Like an awesome plug to get some get a good network. I'm gonna